This is so culturally inflammatory today, but if you ever wonder whether or not the Bible is advocating a patriarchal structure, read Numbers 30. It's absolutely clear. Now, the what's happening there can be interpreted different ways. So the idea in that chapter is that the women in the family, if they make a promise and the father hears it and doesn't say anything, then it's binding on the family. But if the father doesn't hear about it, and as soon as he does, he's like, no, 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 we can't do that. Then that woman who made that promise, she's now released from having to fulfill that vow, whatever it is. But the father, if he vows anything, there is nothing that he can do to undo that vow. And so the idea that this is essentially, misogynistic, it really is. I think a way better way to understand this is it demonstrates the fact that the household in the scriptures and in almost all times in history was an organization. And we all would be completely comfortable with this idea in the context of a business transaction. So you've got a business and, if the CEO says we're doing that and signs the contract, then it's binding on the organization. But if some
Mhm.
sales guy signs a contract and the CEO never heard about it, they'd never signed anything like that before. And when a company comes and says, well, you guys signed this, he's like, well, that person did not have the authority to sign that without my approval. And they never got my approval. So that is an invalid obligation on this business. Um, Everyone understands that doesn't mean that the salesperson is less valuable or more valuable or, than the CEO. Just we understand there's roles, and these roles in an organizational structure are critical because you can't have people all the way down the chain able to obligate the entire business. There has to be some sense of, okay, what's the position? That's why oftentimes when you sign something for the sake of a company, the title of the person signing is a critical part of that. Well, in the Old Testament, this was also true. I mean, the father, his signature, he is the patriarch of the family. He is the father of the family, and therefore he has the authority to obligate the entire household to a vow. Whereas somebody who is inside the organization, a female in this case, as is described in Numbers 30, she doesn't have the authority to bind the entire family, in particular, bind the patriarch himself to
Mm.
an agreement that he's never heard about and has never personally agreed to. And this is where, even the idea of the Bible really coming out against like men being effeminate. One of the reasons that that's really dangerous is because men bear this organizational responsibility for the entire family, or as Vito Corleone says in The Godfather, he says, "Women and children can be careless, but not men." Men cannot be careless, and
Mm.
you might think, "Well, that's terrible." Again, this is not about values. This is not about who's bears the image of God or who's more valuable in general. This is about roles in an organizational structure. And in the same way, somebody higher up in an organizational structure, because they don't just represent themselves, they represent the entire organization and can bind the entire organization, and their decisions implicate everybody all the way down the chain. That person can't be as careless as somebody down further in the chain. And it's good actually for people further down to have the freedom to be more careless. There are You want to have a sandbox in which certain gifts can thrive, where you can try things and say things and, but at some point when you're in the middle of a negotiation, you need to be able to say things that are binding or sign contracts. And that at that point, there is a different level of seriousness that needs to come to play. And men in particular who want to be fathers and want to lead multi-generational families have to become comfortable with shouldering that level of obligation. And it doesn't just happen between the family and other people. It also happens within the family. And that's why, like, when you're a father, one of the things I talk to a lot of dads about is you have to be really careful to make sure your voice has a certain level of gravitas in the family. And oftentimes today, the idea of sort of the playful dad, where there is a sense where he's kind of, can be bullied around or goofed around in the context of his relationship with his kids, but there's never a time where people feel the gravity of, oh, it's the father who's saying this. Like a
Mhm.
lot of dads today, they are comfortable with. with essentially being treated like peers within their own family by their children. And that's actually not healthy because again, you don't represent just yourself. You represent God's, you're the first instance of the intuitions that your children are going to have about the nature of who God is. And you're going to eventually transfer that to God himself. And they're going to see the difference and the imperfections. But you have to be really careful because who else is going to represent to that child what it means to obey God, to fear God? Like all of these things, I think have to be first instantiated by the father.